I'm finding it more and more challenging to bump into audiences that gather for topics such as these. It's easy to get a crowd to come hear someone talk about how to make $1 million in 3 weeks. It's easy to draw a crowd that's interested in knowing 7 steps to personal success. We've become the kind of culture and society where people flock to conversations that are aimed at their own benefit and are running with great speed away from causes that exist for the sake of the greater good. And so when I walked in here tonight, I expect to see 3 or 4 people who just had to be here because it's their jobs. But to see all of you young people and to see members of the administration, for the president to be here, you know, presidents of schools like these have a lot to do. But for the leadership of the school to take time to come and participate in this conversation where we're looking at why diversity is important in higher education, that says a lot about a school. Let's give our president a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah. When I met Jim Sultan, he was leading the higher education efforts in New Jersey, and he was so smart and so personable and so optimistic. I said, he won't stay in Jersey long. That's for sure. He must not know this is New Jersey. And he brought brilliance, and he never compromised his position. He always told the truth to whoever would listen, and I always respected him. I'm so happy he's back in New Jersey. When I came on this campus, I was shocked. I've been to community college. I was Secretary of State, so I've been to some, well, I won't name them because you're filming me, but I've been to a lot of community colleges. But this is like the Ivy League of community colleges in New Jersey. My goodness, you need signs to get around. You know, the community college that I taught, you just need an elevator to get up and down the stairs, you know. But what a marvelous campus, and good-looking buildings and nice roads and grass. You probably get deer down here, right? Deer and no bears, I hope. And good-looking people. I haven't seen anybody ugly since I got here. I always look for the ugly folks, you know. I don't see any ugly people, just good-looking people. And obviously concerned about not just the physical campus, but the quality of life on campus. Thank you so much for this opportunity to come. Now, you take great risk in inviting a Baptist preacher because we're known to take a long time. You know, it takes us a long time to say good morning. And we stay in church. Our image is we stay in church all day long. And, you know, if you're a baby, you go to sleep on your mother's lap. So I just want you to know that I realize that this is a public institution, but obviously you must be faith-based because you gave me an hour, and any Baptist preacher that can keep it to an hour, you have great faith in believing that's possible. But the fact is I am Baptist, but went to a Catholic college for my bachelor's degree. I went to a Presbyterian college for my master's degree. I went to a Methodist college for my doctorate, and I have 2 sons who, when they were teenagers, taught me how to keep it short. We were on our way to church. They're twins. Malcolm is the oldest, Martin is the youngest. And we were on our way to church one night, and Malcolm said, "What are you going to preach about tonight, Dad?" And I said, "What would you like me to preach about?" And his younger son, Martin, said, "I'd like you to preach about 5 minutes and sit down." So in honor of Martin, I will not keep you here all night. But thank you for giving me enough time to spend a few thoughts into this subject matter. As I was thinking about this gathering, and when I walked in the room, I thought about something Martin Luther King said. He said when he went to Memphis, we have to develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. He called for a radical concern that we would have for each other. And this issue of diversity is more than just a nice program, more than political correctness. It's got to be deeper than a fad. It's got to be a radical concern we have for the quality of the human family. My pastor was a minister who served at our church for 54 years. He served as the first African-American Speaker of the state legislature. He was head of the state NAACP, pastor of our church, and he was quite prominent. In the 1970s, he traveled the country as the only African-American speaker of a state legislature. And he was active so long, he had all these stories about things that had happened in New Jersey. And one story I'll never forget, he said that when the New Jersey Turnpike was first built, the New Jersey Turnpike had not been named, but they knew it would be an extension of Route 95. And so while the politicians were debating as to what they would call this road, they put up temporary signs that just said US 95. And even when cars were driving down that highway, before they named it, they just had these signs, you know, welcome to US 95. So a fella, according to my pastor, was driving down US 95 and he was flying. He was driving the way I drive every now and then. He was doing at least 80 to 85 miles an hour. And so he saw a police car behind him, New Jersey State Police, and the police car came behind him and had the red light on, and the guy just kept on driving. And the police kept getting closer and closer, and the guy kept on driving. Until finally the police car pulled up next to him and said, you know, move over, move over. And the guy pulled over, and the police officer said, may I see your license and registration? He said, sure, but why did you pull me over? He said, because you were speeding, and I plan to give you a ticket. He said, well, I wasn't speeding. How could I have been speeding? And the police officer said, well, you were doing 85 miles an hour. He said, yeah, but I saw a sign that said us 95. And of course, he had defined us to mean him. And when I think about diversity and people who have this conversation, a part of our challenge is really to define who us is. For that young man, us was anybody who read the sign. And in a perfect world, when we grow up, us should be so inclusive that when anyone uses the term us, everybody feels that they're talking about them. And what's interesting about this subject, as Dr. Sultan said, is that it has become almost a dirty word in a sense. That diversity in the context of scarcity often causes people to be intimidated by the conversation. Because as we face budget cuts, as we look at shrinking resources, as we consider the joblessness in so many parts of the country, as we look at globalization, the word diversity is somewhat intimidating because it suggests that perhaps one group will be pit against another. And I'm hoping before we leave here today, we can dispel that notion and elevate our minds to conclude that diversity is not a program but a lifestyle. I was Secretary of State 1999. Governor Whitman appointed me. It was an interesting time in my life. I'd never had a real job before. And I got up and went to work and went to the State House. My office was the first door on the left. The state police drove me around. Took me about 2 years to get used to being around cops that much, you know. I'm not sure I ever truly got used to it. And I had the unenviable task of being responsible for responding to New York's needs as Secretary of State on September 11th, 2001. The state police took me to the command center. Our acting governor was there. We were watching on television the events of the day. And the governor of New York called over to our command center to speak to the governor of New Jersey to say that the second tower of the World Trade Center had fallen. And he wanted us to know that people would be coming by the boatload from New York to New Jersey, and he wanted us to be ready. And the governor turned to me and said, I'd like you to go to Liberty State Park, the park right across the street from Battery Park, right across the river. And I'd like you to go and coordinate the activities. There were emergency vehicles there. On September 11, 2001, we had a convention of surgeons going on in Secaucus, and the convention stopped. All of the surgeons rushed over to Jersey City, and they set up 3 triages so that people coming over could experience emergency surgery if they needed it. We had ambulances and firefighters lined up for almost 2 miles, and people were coming over from New York by the boat. I rushed from the command center over to a helicopter. And the helicopter flew me with a fighter jet as an escort towards Jersey City. And the closer I got, the more I could see the smoke that was coming up from across the river. And I was thinking about what I would do when I got there. There was a lieutenant colonel from the state police with me. There was a National Guardsman in full battle fatigue with me. And we landed in Jersey City, and by the time we got there, the boats had stopped coming. All of the people who could get out had gotten out. They weren't injured, and they had gone home or to their various locations. And by the time I got to Jersey City, we had doctors, we had emergency vehicles, we had volunteers, but we had no people. When we checked with all of the people that we could check with, it was clear that the people who could come had come. And now the question was, should we release the emergency vehicles? Should we send the volunteers home? Or should we wait there for the next wave of people to come? I thought that we could get information from New York. We tried calling Mayor Giuliani on our cell phones, but the Verizon tower in New York is right next to the World Trade Center, and the Verizon tower had fallen, and all cell communications had been shut down, not to mention the fact that the CIA and the Army were all in the air, and it was like on lockdown. So the only way I could get the answer to the question, should we release people or should we stay here, was to go to New York myself. The state police got a boat. We went with our lieutenant colonel and our soldier across the Hudson River, and you could see the ashes falling in the river as we crossed. And halfway across that river, I asked myself, have you lost your mind? Everybody else is leaving New York. You're going to New York? And when we got to New York, we went to a station that was managed by the Coast Guard. And they provided a vehicle and drove us from the Coast Guard station over to One Police Plaza. On our way, we could see the World Trade Center in flames. It was the most horrifying sight I'd ever seen with my natural eyes. Steel was melting like butter in a microwave. It was crazy. And it was pitch black dark outside. You could see soldiers standing on the corner with automatic weapons in their hands, and it was the most secure environment I'd ever been in my life. When we got to One Police Plaza, as we were about to get out of the car, I noticed that they were checking everything walking, asking for ID. And because I had rushed from the command center at the request of the acting governor to the helicopter, I forgot to go to my car to get my driver's license. Here I am now in New York City on September 11th, in the middle of a war zone with the highest level of security in history, and I can't prove who I am. It was the scariest moment of my life. But I'm a preacher, you know, I can put words together, so I was rehearsing what I would say as I approached the checkpoint. But I got so discouraged, the state trooper who was with me was dressed, and everything on him said New Jersey State Police. His hat said it, his jacket said it, everything said it. But when he got to One Police Plaza, they said, may I see your ID? I said, Lord, this is not good. Then the soldier, the National Guardsman with me, he had on full battle fatigue. He had, that green and black and dark green stuff. He had on a hat and combat boots. It said U.S. Army. And when he got to the checkpoint, they said, may I see your ID? And when I walked up there, I was prepared to tell my whole story. When I walked up to the checkpoint, they said, go right on in. I said, man, this is something. I'm Secretary of State. I said, this guy must know me. He must have seen me on television. I felt so important. I was just so happy. I didn't have to lie. I didn't have to cry. They just let me right on in. So we went inside, went upstairs to the command center. You should have seen it. People running to and fro, phones jumping off the hook, and there was one man in charge, and our state trooper went over to him, and they were having a conversation. I sat down and waited, and New York said to our state trooper, what we need from New Jersey is light. It's dark. Broadway has brought lights. The National Guard has brought lights. We need more lights because we need to start looking for more bodies. And I had been authorized by the governor to provide New York with anything New York needed. If they needed money, we'd give money. If they needed troops, we'd send troops. Whatever they needed, I was authorized to send, and what they needed was lights. When the commander of New York said that to the lieutenant colonel of the New Jersey State Police, the lieutenant colonel said, come over here, because this man sitting right here is the one who's authorized to provide you with your need. And the police officer from New York looked at me, and he looked at the state trooper, and he looked at me again, and he looked at the state trooper again. And you could tell that the computer in his mind could not calculate how this little dark guy sitting on this chair with this gray patch in his head was the one that had the power to authorize his lights. He was so surprised that he got embarrassed himself. He apologized even though he hadn't done anything. But it just took him a moment, because he did not assume that the person that he'd have to make his request through looked like me. And when I saw his surprise and his apology, then I realized how I got in that building. See, I thought I'd gotten in the building because I was important. Truth is, they saw a black man with 4 white guys in uniform. They thought I was one of the terrorists. They said, let him in, take him in, lock him up. There goes one of them. They thought I was under arrest. And that kind of assumption can spur you to do any number of things, rather than that experience expanding a sense of bitterness in me. I decided on that day to renew my commitment to making sure I never make a decision about somebody based on how they look, rather than waiting to find out who they are. It would have been a terrible mistake had he ignored me completely, because I had the power to solve his big problem. And when we think about diversity, we have to think about it in terms of what we miss by this lack of appreciation. What we ignore when we only focus on people who think like us, look like us, talk like us, live like us, or are us. We have to put aside this idea of being politically correct, or rise above the fear of being sued by a discrimination suit, and think about who we are as a people. And when we think about who we are as a people, it helps us really understand this emphasis on diversity, because if we miss it, then diversity simply becomes a report that counts the number of blacks and whites and Hispanics and Asians and men and women and this and that, and sends it somewhere, and it goes in a file somewhere, and then the people that have the best percentages win the prize. But it's got to be much deeper than that. It's got to be more of a lifestyle than it is a program. So before becoming Secretary of State, I decided that I wanted to expose myself to diverse environments like this. And so, like you, I chose a school where not only Baptists went to school, but Lutherans and Presbyterians and Catholics and Buddhists and Muslims and Jews. I chose a school where if I was going to prepare for religious leadership, I wanted to be around diverse people with male and female. I wanted to be with blacks and whites and Asians and Latinos. I wanted to be with Africans and South Americans. And I applied to 3 schools for my master's degree, and the one that I chose in large part because of its diversity. It helped that they gave me a scholarship too. So I went to Princeton. I thought about going to Harvard, I thought about going to Yale, but I chose Princeton because it was truly a diverse campus. And when I got there, I was excited. It lived up to my expectations. First class, 8 o'clock on Monday morning, theology. Maybe 90 people in the room. When I looked around that room, everybody was there, male, female, black, white, Asian, Latino, American, international. We were all there. Everybody in this room, our professor was Asian, and it was just a rich environment. I said, I came to the right place, that this school has lived up to my expectations. We sat there for 2 hours, bored to tears, but we were diverse. And then, Jim, we went to the cafeteria. We left the big lecture hall where we were assigned to go. We left Theology 101 where we had to go. And we went to the cafeteria where we had some options. And what I noticed about the cafeteria from almost day one is that the cafeteria was organized differently than the lecture hall. In the lecture hall, we all sat together, we studied together, we told jokes together, we said, what do you say? Together. But in the cafeteria, we ate by tribe. The white tribe ate over here. The black tribe ate over there. The Hispanic tribe ate over there. We decided that the only way we can keep up with the American students is to organize groups of people, and instead of trying to read all 9 books, each one of us reads one book. If we have 9 books, then we'll form a group of 9 people. One will read book number 1, one will read book number 2. Then when we get together in our meetings, every professor at Princeton and the people right across the cafeteria from us had the solution to our problem. But we were being too tribal to let them help us. And that's really what the world of diversity is inviting us to think about. Malcolm Gladwell wrote this wonderful book. We wrote 3 wonderful books, and in one of them he talked about the work ethic of certain ethnicities and why they do so well. It's not magic. They work harder. They spend more hours doing their subject matter, and so they're better in math and science. So the question is, do we step back and look at each other very carefully and nervously, or do we come together during Black History Month and dress up as if all of us are black and just have a ceremony? Or do we really engage each other and discover the strength of your story and the genius of my experience and pull them together so that the community can be better than it was by tribe? It's an interesting study, but it's a dynamic study because diversity assumes that I've got something that can enhance your life, and you've got something that can solve my problem. And together we become a much better team, a much better campus, a much better community. It's not just celebration. It's really the sharing of strengths. So I taught in a community college, Bill President. I taught for 2 years in a community college, and what I like about community colleges is this, well, at least this community college, they told you what to teach. They said, okay, here are the courses we offer. You want to teach one of these courses? Here's the syllabus, teach it. And they gave me a course called Race Relations. Because all the students were black. So here I am talking race relations to one race. And what was interesting was that I kind of deviated from the syllabus, don't tell anybody, but I deviated from the syllabus, and we started talking about different issues, and I discovered that many of my students resented the fact that there was a particular ethnic group that was not African American that was buying prime real estate in the black community. And one of these prime real estates was on a corner that had historically been owned by an African American entrepreneur, and now was owned by this person from another country, and he was only 25 years old, and my students were angry. They were angry. They were angry at him, and they were angry at the government because they believed that the government had a program for people from this country, just this country. And when they got here, however they got here, our government gave them a pot of money, and they used that money to buy property in black neighborhoods, just black neighborhoods. And that's why all of these people own so much property in our neighborhood. And we're mad at them. Now, we're not mad at ourselves for not saving and investing ourselves. We're mad at them. And so I went to the corner where there was a cleaners, and I invited him to my class, 25 years old. And I asked him to tell his story to my class. And I document this in my book because it was revelatory, not just from a cultural perspective, but an economic perspective. And I said, just tell them what you told me. I went to the cleaners, he told me a story, and he told my students. He said, now, when I was 15, I decided that I needed to help my family. I couldn't speak any English. I felt like if I could get to America, I could really help my family. He said, I went to America, I had $13 in my pocket, spoke no English, found some friends of mine and went and lived with them and slept on the floor. I had one pair of black pants, 2 white shirts, and a pair of shoes. And I went to work every day and I saved every penny that I made. He said, I saw a business that I wanted to buy, and I needed $30,000 in cash. And I couldn't figure out where would I get $30,000 in cash because I can't just walk into a bank and ask for $30,000. By then, he was about 19. So he joined a group of people from his country who got together every month, and they would bring $2,000 each, 15 people. And every month, they'd put the money in the pot, and every month, one of them would take the whole pot and use it to buy business. And when his turn came, he got $30,000. No credit checks, no background checks. And he used that $30,000 as a down payment to buy this piece of real estate. The government didn't even know he was here. And my students sat there with their mouths open. Now, what was interesting was that not one of my students decided that they should go out and form a group themselves. And not one of them asked, could they join his group? But what happened was, this was an intellectual exercise. Now, I've used that to guide and govern some of my economic strategies, but these people resented this guy. They were angry at the government because they'd never spoken to him. And it's a sad thing when people live in the same neighborhood, drive down the same streets, their children go to the same schools, and we make assumptions about each other and never even speak with each other. That's why diversity has got to be more than a program. And diversity has got to be a lifestyle. It's got to be a lifestyle that says, you know, we are Homo sapiens. We are the highest life form on the planet. We are not dogs or cats or chimpanzees. We are not lions or giraffes. We're humans. We write books. We write books about books. We build institutions. We have academies. We have art museums. We write music. We are creative beings. We are the highest life form. It doesn't matter what your religion is. It doesn't matter what your philosophy is. The fact is, everybody who has half a brain knows that we are smarter than dogs. Dogs don't talk, not real dogs. Horses can't reason the way we do. I'm 152 pounds. I can get on a 600-pound horse, and I'm in charge. You know why? Because I'm smarter than the horse. It doesn't matter what nationality I am. We are the highest life form on the planet. And if we are the superior species, if we are the most intelligent of the intelligent, then we ought to do better at figuring out how to live together and how to get to know each other. That's really what diversity is. It's not a program. It's really a lifestyle. And then when we appreciate the beauty of our uniqueness, we can foster institutional policies that reflect true diversity. I went to South Africa to speak right after Mr. Mandela came out, and I was with a group of young people, and it was a mixed crowd, and the sponsors were so proud that they had a diverse audience and a diverse event. But the music wasn't diverse. The food wasn't diverse. The leadership wasn't diverse. So the question is diversity simply putting people who look differently in a room, or is diversity creating an experience where people from different backgrounds can feel like us is us? There's a very interesting analysis that goes on when you go deeper than the numbers and the faces and the color and really deal with who we are as humans. I'm challenging my own church. If you come to my church on a Sunday morning and stay there for a couple of hours, you'll say, boy, this is a black church. In fact, CNN came to my church because they wanted Black in America 3 to discuss the role of the black church. I didn't tell them my secret. You know what my secret is? We're not a black church. A black church, traditionally, is a church of African Americans where people who have parents who are African Americans, who have parents who are African Americans. An African American church is a church that functions in that tradition. The fact is, when you walk in my church, what looks like an African American may be a Nigerian or a Ghanaian or a Jamaican or a Puerto Rican. The fastest growing segment of new members in our church come from Africa, not from Alabama. Which means that if our church functions as if all of us came from Mississippi, we will miss the fact that many of my members come from a war-torn Sierra Leone where their brothers and sisters had their arms cut off because of the war. And if we miss that, if we miss that fact, then we will miss the diversity even within the context of people who look like they belong to the same crowd. And so at First Baptist, we're starting on Sunday afternoon a worship experience for Nigerians and expand that to West Africans. We often have to give the welcome in more than one language to recognize the fact that there's more than one ethnic group there. And during Black History Month, we have to recognize the fact that we have Caucasians in the congregation, and if Black History Month is simply a time for black people to get mad all over again and scare white people to death, that's not a celebration of our history. It's further dividing people from each other. So my cousin worked at a car rental place. Nice job. She and her manager were friends. Her manager was boss, but they were friends. They went on vacation together. They went to lunch together. They partied together. They looked for guys together. They were just friends at the car rental place. But then something happened in our family. A woman in my family named Aunt Carrie died. Now, Aunt Carrie was not my mother's sister. Aunt Carrie was not my grandmother's sister. Aunt Carrie was my grandmother's mother's sister, but she was younger than my grandmother. Aunt Carrie lived on the second floor of our house, and my grandmother lived on the first floor, and Aunt Carrie and my grandmother were more like sisters than anything, and my grandfather was an alcoholic, and so Aunt Carrie helped my grandmother raise her children. Aunt Carrie raised my mother and bought her shoes as if she was her own daughter. Aunt Carrie was as close to us as anybody in the world. When Aunt Carrie had her stroke, she came to my house and lived. And I have a large number of cousins who just love Aunt Carrie. So when Aunt Carrie died, my cousin went to her employer and said, I won't be in for the next couple of days. She said, why? She said, because Aunt Carrie died. And her manager said to her, now they're friends. They party together. They vacation together. They look for guys together. They're friends. And her friend manager says to my cousin, but wait a minute. You said your Aunt Carrie died and you're going to be off for 3 days? She said, yeah, we got to pick out the casket. We've got to bake food. You know, we've got stuff to do. And the manager said, but wait a minute. The company policy is that you can only take off if an immediate family member dies. And my cousin said, well, wait a minute, you mean immediate family? You can't get much more immediate than Aunt Carrie. But immediate family, according to the company policies of that institution, means mama, daddy, son, daughter, or the dog. Aunt Carrie does not fit in the definition of immediate family of that corporation. Now, the decision for my cousin is not a decision. If I have to choose between this little piece of job and being with my family at a time when Aunt Carrie goes, there's no, if you got to fire me, but I'm going to celebrate the life of Aunt Carrie. And her friend, her manager, they travel together, they party together, they look for guys together. She said, I have no choice. The rules are the rules. And my cousin lost her job. She was fired by her friend, not a racist. She couldn't call Al Sharpton to come down there and march. That was her friend. She was not a racist personally. But the institution had rules that did not incorporate our culture. And so when racism is discussed, when diversity is discussed, we have to look at not only how we feel about each other personally, but what does the institution say? Is the institution structured to embrace my religion? Or is the institution only structured to respect the rights of Baptists and not the rights of Jews? We have a big problem with that in this country because we know intellectually that radical Islam is the promoter, the prime promoter of the terrorism that's aimed itself at us. But at the same time, we have to have rules that allow people to be Muslims. That if a person cannot practice Islam because there are some nuts in their religion that kill people, then perhaps you don't want me either because there were some nuts in my religion that wore white hoods and burned crosses on people's lawns. I mean, if the Muslims cannot build a mosque near the World Trade Center, then why should a Christian be able to build a church any place near a community that was terrorized by crazy Christians? In other words, we have to be careful not to undermine our ability to think because we allow rules to exist that end up demonstrating racist attitudes even if they're executed by people who are not racist or prejudiced or mean. And so my cousin lost her job, not because she was the victim of individual racism, but my cousin lost her job because the institution within which she worked had not moved quickly enough to embrace the culture that she brought to the table. I saw this graphically when I was Secretary of State. You know, all municipalities in New Jersey are responsible for putting certain notices in public view in certain newspapers. And we found out back in 2000 that there was an entire cluster of people from China living in New Jersey whose primary news vehicle was not the Star-Ledger, not the Asbury Park Press, not the New York Times, but there was a Chinese language newspaper that was the primary vehicle for people in New Jersey of Chinese descent to find out everything. Yet not one municipality, not one state agency was putting public notices in that newspaper. So then you look up and say, well, where's the Chinese community represented in this bidding process? Where are the Chinese vendors? Where are the Chinese applicants for jobs? Well, did you ever tell them that the job was there? No, because you ignored the vehicle they used to find out. Diversity is more than a program, it's a lifestyle. And it requires going beneath the statistics and the numbers and the celebrations and the cultural events to really embrace who people are and to meet them right there, and then to insist that the rules of the institution embrace the culture of the people who were there. Finally, I have to confess that I was hesitant to come here to do this talk because I didn't want to talk about diversity. I try not to spend a lot of time talking about diversity. I've almost given up. And I say that because often people will invite you because diversity is a program. It's something you got to do. After all, it's Black History Month. Lift every voice and sing. But because of your history and because of your leadership, I decided I would come to really say what I really feel. I haven't told you what I really feel yet. All that was introduction. All right? Yeah, I told you I was Baptist. To understand diversity as an authentic lifestyle, I believe we have to know the difference between, and I can say this here because you all in college and this is the academy, understand the difference between the adjectival approach to diversity and the adverbial approach to diversity. To know the difference between an adjective and an adverb will elevate our understanding of diversity completely. When my sons were born, they were twins, of course, identical, and they started talking, well, they talked their own language first, and when they started talking our language, I would, because I'm a speaker, I would talk to them incessantly. And when they were old enough, I would always ask them the question when I come in for a trip or when I call them on the phone, boys, how are you doing? And when I noticed, Mr. President, it was my son, I'm the son of an English teacher. I'm a preacher and a pastor myself. And I would say to my boys, how are you doing? And they would say together, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. And I'd ask them again, how are you doing? They hadn't been to school yet. You know, they were too young for preschool. I'd say, sons, how are you doing? I'd come in from the airport and hug them, how you doing? I'm doing good. And one day I just couldn't take it anymore. You know, I come from a family, my father would stop me mid-sentence. So I took, my wife was in the kitchen, my boys were about 2, maybe 2.5. I took them in the next room, sat them on the couch. I said, sons, I need to explain to you the difference between a verb, an adverb, and an adjective, all right? My wife peeped around the corner and said, have you lost your mind? I said, you have to know. And adverb is a word that responds to a verb, an adjective to a noun. And when I ask you, how are you doing? The answer has got to correspond with doing, which is a verb, and you need an adverb to describe the verb. And when you say I'm doing good, you're using an adjective, which is what makes it incorrect. An adjective cannot appropriately answer a question that ends with a verb. So, because by then my wife was dialing 911. She thought I had a lot. My little boys are sitting there, looking up at me, trying to figure out, can they go back and watch some TV? And so I said, so the point is, when Dad says, how are you doing? I need you to say, I'm doing well, because well is an adverb. And today, if you ask my boys, how you doing? They will say, I'm doing well. I brainwashed them. They were the only children in kindergarten who said to the teacher, we're doing well. Doing well. That's the difference between an adjective and an adverb. And I tell you that because when we talk about diversity, we often focus on the word different. I'm different than you. She's different from him. In fact, we talk about celebrating differences. And if I'm different from you, I'm other than you. And diversity, if it focuses on the different, is focusing on the adjective. And it necessarily makes people nervous. It often drives a wedge between you and me, because who wants to feel good about everything different? You clap on 1 and 2, 1 and 3. You're European. I clap on 2 and 4. We're different. And in many instances, particularly in higher education, focusing on the different has been well-meaning, but has had very destructive outcomes, because we become specialists in how different we are. So I say, listen, if you clap on 1 and 3 because your cultural heritage, because of your environment, because of your instructions, if you clap on 1 and 3, if that's what you do, and I clap on 2 and 4, one way to look at it is we're different. The other way to look at it is, but we're both clapping, which means that we're doing the same thing differently. By the way, if you clap on 1 and 3, I clap on 2 and 4, we don't miss a beat. And once I begin to appreciate the fact that I am going about the business of being human, and you are going about the business of being human, and I'm doing it slightly differently than you are, I have not dismissed the possibility that we are still the same. And ultimately, diversity, if it divides us, is a disadvantage. But if diversity can unite us, then it is a huge advantage. And the only way diversity can unite us is when we understand that our differences are more adverbial than they are adjectival. That we're singing differently. We're praying differently. We're studying differently. We're clapping differently. I eat sweet potato pie, you eat pumpkin pie, but we're eating. We're just doing it differently. Unfortunately, it's the different that causes wars. It's the focus on different that causes conflict. It's the commitment to being different that makes people mean and selfish and self-centered. But whenever we see a group of people who are doing something differently, but they can celebrate the something that they have in common, then we have what Dr. King called the beloved community. And we have true freedom and expression. So my hope for this campus is that you will become a beacon of light for those who are truly looking for the lifestyle of diversity. Not a program that you have to do to meet some requirement of a grant, but rather a lifestyle that appreciates the beauty and the value and the depth of everybody's story. I promise you that when you get to know my story, where I'm really from, and think about who I am, you'll appreciate me as a person more. Because when Jim gives you my introduction, talks about my degrees and my positions, he does not tell my story. My story starts at a little hospital in Brooklyn that had so many rats we thought they belonged there. Coldwater Flat in Bed-Stuy, where my whole family lived, and we had no money at all. Went to a segregated school system where my 6th grade teacher told me, you'd never finish high school, but if you do, you're going to jail. Of course, when I became Secretary of State, I sent her a note, said, I'm all right, I'm doing better than you are. Being arrested in Newark for helping a guy who was being beaten by an older guy, and the older guy turned out to be a police officer. They put a club in my head and they put me in jail and charged me with assault and battery on a police officer. That my story is not just a story of success and achievement, but nobody's is. Every story has value. And when we begin to really mine out the beauty of each other's stories, then we can see that all of us are striving for a better life and better families and better community and a better campus. We're just striving differently. And when we get there, we will be able to demonstrate that somewhere on this planet, people were able to rise above their tribal instincts and really see the beauty and the value of the human family and our common interests. So thank you for your interest in diversity, and I hope I've challenged you to do something or think of something or say something you may not have thought or said or done had I not come. God bless you.